Joe Mullings, Untitled, and Provocative and Often Necessary, because I add that tagline in because the world has become a little too, I think, uh, scared to respectfully speak their mind and talk about subjects at hand. So we talk about it being provocative and certainly respectfully necessary. With me today is a guest who, over the years, we've also become friends, and we have our thoughts on the surgical robotic world in general, and certainly he's an expert in soft tissue. So Steve Bell, thank you for joining me from across the lake.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure, Joe. It's always a pleasure to be on the show, and it's always a pleasure because we get to rook it up a little bit, which I just love doing. So it's great.
Yeah, yeah, and gosh, you've got a great career in medtech, and certainly was an early pioneer in soft tissue surgical robotics commercialization and bringing the CMR platform to the marketplace, which I have a lot of respect for. And you and your team did fabulous things. And now you're somewhat of a free agent.
Yes, I am. Yeah. I've left CMR after 6 phenomenal years. And now I'm trying to help a lot of other startups to do the same path. And I think part of that is that, you go through this journey in life, and at some point you pick up enough scar tissue, you want to help a lot of other people. So that's what I'm trying to do now.
Yeah. Yeah. Last time we saw each other actually was in CMR. We had, you and I had a sit. And what I loved about it, and this is why I'm privileged to have you as an early guest on the show, is you said, let's just sit down, no script. You can ask whatever you want. And I can't tell you how much I respect that, because we just legitimately just went at it. And you revealed certainly nothing proprietary, but how you thought and how the team thought and what challenges you faced in developing, one of the early soft tissue robotic platforms that successfully launched, outside the US.
Yeah, and again, I think that that's part of the style that I think the industry needs a little bit, which is just, we've all got to somehow just say it as it is. And again, not to make anything negative or positive anyway, but what it's really about is trying to reveal to people the realities so that we can all get better, so that the whole industry just improves continuously. And I think that sometimes you just need some reality at that.
Yeah. Yeah, and what's interesting with the surgical robotic platform, and I love the work that you've been putting out on the soft tissue side, especially your commentary in the areas. This is not an easy thing to do.
No, on the soft tissue side, it's before I really got into it with CMR, I had an impression in my head from having had interactions on the laparoscopic side. And I thought, well, it's going to be quite difficult. And then I suddenly realized when I was in the middle of it, it's a completely different sport. It's not even a different league. It's a completely different sport. And I think it's just got all the hardest bits of everything in medtech rolled into one. And, it's what it makes it difficult. And again, I'll give my dues to Intuitive. You have a phenomenal market leader in there that set the bar so high, which just makes everything just so much harder.
Yeah, and you bring up Intuitive, and it's a good place to start for sure. Is and you've been pretty vocal about it, myself too. Is why would you pick a fight with them on their battleground, right? I had a great sort of combatives coach that I used to train with and work with, a guy named Tony Blauer, and he said, you know what? If you're going to pick a fight with a kickboxer, do it in a phone booth, because his tools aren't appropriate there, right? And so and so those who are picking a fight with Intuitive on their field of battle with the artillery, manpower, and economics that they have, I still scratch my head at the people who want to do that.
Yeah, and that was, that was a choice that we made very early on, was not to go and try and, start fighting with them in the US. It's just such a hard thing to do. And in some points, you just think it's also a little bit of a stupid thing to do. I mean, for me, it's just fairly obvious. I guess for some others, it's not. They think that's the big market to go after. What I think people don't understand is that there's a huge appetite outside of the US for alternatives. So if there's appetite outside, there's space outside, form factors and formats might have a better chance outside, why wouldn't you do that? It was just completely obvious to us at the time.
Hmm. Hmm. And you know, I think back, and everybody has this in their B school studies, is, you know, the crash and burns of Blackberries, Betamax, Kodak, Nokia, Polaroid, and you know, you can point to those that they missed the tech, and certainly the consumer market has a different inertial force to it than the healthcare market, right? And
Yeah.
and for all the right and wrong reasons. Um, what do you think will be the factors that put somebody like an Intuitive at risk, given that they've got a stranglehold in a very specific market right now? What do you think would be the potential equalizer or the gap in the game if there was one?
That's a great question. So I think the first place you got to think about that is you've just got to have performance that they have. Okay, that's number one. That's just to get you on the game with them, is performance that they have. So performance of instruments, the range of instruments, the advanced instruments, the vision systems. Where I think that people can, could knock them out a little bit is if they come up with a format that allows much better workflow in the operating rooms. And I think in the US, that there's such a huge drive to move stuff to the ASCs, for example. If you could find a robotic format that absolutely shines in the ASCs, and you don't have to go with them head on in the main block. What happens is the cases come to you in the ASCs, and what you could end up doing is taking the fuel from them because the cases move to a different location. So if you can come up with a format or a workflow or something about your system that allows you to get it in things like the ASCs or the outpatient departments, and then move the caseloads to there, I think that's a big risk for them if they physically with their system can't get it into those places.
Yeah, I got to believe though that Gary and Dave are not sitting still, ignoring the ASC model. So I am waiting over the next 12 to 24 months for them to birth a platform that's going to address that market. There are 30,000 ORs in the U.S., and those ORs typically are 400 to 600 square feet, right?
Yeah.
And only 4,800 of those have a Da Vinci in it, if I think I'm correct on the numbers. And that
Yeah.
Da Vinci requires like 750 plus square feet in it. So that's your phone booth, if you will. If you're going to fight
Yeah.
Da Vinci
Yeah.
as a kickboxer, you got to put him in a phone booth, and maybe the
Yeah.
ASC is the phone booth there. But I doubt that Dave and Gary are standing still on that as well.
Yeah, I think just looking at what they've got in their armament from the past, the sort of the formats that they had when they took things like computer motion. They know how to make a small robot as well, I'm sure. So if size is the thing, I'm sure that if there's one company that could do it, it's definitely them. They'd be able to do it. And again, I imagine that they are definitely thinking that as they start to see the caseload moving that way, that is where their opportunity is. But you asked me what could be their Achilles heel and their weakness is if they don't do it. I
Yeah.
think that would be a place where people could go and attack them.
There are also some interesting form factors coming out just in the last 2 or 3 years, right? And those form factors, when you look at an Intuitive, you look at an Ascensus, you look at a CMR, if I'm not mistaken, all of those they wanted to be everything. They wanted to have their own proprietary visualization system, right? They wanted their own wristed instruments. They wanted their own, right? So your end effectors were confined to that platform.
Yeah.
And so therefore, what is omitted may be really interesting to think about, right? So best in class visualization. Nearly every platform and every surgeon you heard would say, I take 80% of Intuitive's performance if I could see better and see things more clearly and be able to use my natural skill of understanding anatomy in a better way from a higher definition, or maybe a tissue characterization, whatever it was. And the same thing with the tools. And now you're seeing the distal motions and the Moon surgicals coming on the scene right now. And they're saying you could use your own camera. In fact, you might even be an unlock for certain new visualization systems, because Now you don't have a human holding it, and we have tracking on that. And then you could use your stapler, or you could use your favorite approach and still gather the digital data of advisement downrange. And it's changing the economics because I don't have to throw that striker stack out. I could use my favorite stapler, right? I could now unlock new visualization capabilities. So what's your thought in that area? Is that our new form factor potentially coming out?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. So in terms of being able to use better visualization systems, yeah, you're right. You know, if you look at some of the gold standards that's out there in 2D handheld laparoscopy, you know, you look at something like Rubina from Storz, it's just stunning. You know, the image is stunning, the ICG on it is stunning. I think a little bit the challenge that I've seen with this is that when you start taking other people's boxes or other people's camera systems or other people's end effectors, the problem with the robot is it's a system from the tip of the instrument all the way back to the plug that goes into the wall and everything that controls it in between, and you lose a degree of control over some of the elements of it. So there's pros and cons in both. And I think that one of the bigger challenges that I saw was if you are beholden to somebody else, let's say that your system has been validated to work with, I'll just say a Storz box, a Storz Rubina system, and you want to go into, I don't know, Indonesia, and they just happen not to sell in Indonesia, well, now your market's blocked and you've got no control over it. So I do understand why some of the companies want to have the total control. So that's one side of the coin. On the other side of it, though, I think you're right. You know, I mean, how many camera systems and how many stacks are people going to have in hospitals? You know, are we going to buy one for every single robot, and we're going to buy one for every, you know, preferred type of laparoscopy, and we're going to buy another one for arthroscopy? And I think the challenge will be that, you know, footprint and size of just having that much equipment sitting around the hospital, cost, servicing. So there is something definitely in the fact that if you can make a system more like a Moon Surgical or say a distal motion, which is, hey, use what you've got in the operating room and take it off the shelf, that's great. As long as it's 3D, I think you have to have 3D. I think anyone who's trying to do robotic surgery without 3D it's going to struggle. I think it's going to have table stakes, things like ICG. They're just going to be table stakes to get in. And part of the problem that you risk is if I had a robotic system that relied on somebody else's imaging system, in some countries, imaging systems are really up to date and fantastic. In other places, you know, they're like 10, 15 years out of date. And do I end up with my system running a really old, really bad 2D camera and people having a really suboptimal experience of my robot because they're running an old camera system on it? So that's the other side of the coin that you've got to look at in this. You get pros and cons with it all.
Yeah, unless you partner up with a Stryker or a Storz and say, listen, I'm going to take my Moon or I'm going to take my distal into APAC region. And certain areas in that may have a less than optimal. Let's go in and partner and figure out a bundle or a package there, because that wouldn't be any different than any other behavior that happens in medtech today. Steve, how about the complexity of cases, right? So we keep on talking about robots, and we talk about, you know, certainly best in class from a performance is, again, platinum standard is intuitive.
Yeah.
But do I need that jacked up in a good way of a surgical robotic platform to perform a much larger volume of cases? Because I'm not going to get that complex case in an ASC, because I got 23 hours and 59 minutes, and then the patient's got to be out of there.
Yeah.
So is the bigger piece of the pie the lower acuity cases from a complexity perspective? And should I go after that volume, right? Because Testarossa, right? You're an Italy guy now. The Ferrari, right? Certainly demands, and maybe not doesn't deserve, but demands that price tag because of what it can do. But John Q. Public is good with their Ford F-150 90% of the time. So I'm wondering if that opens up a much larger market that isn't being addressed with a Da Vinci platform.
Yeah, I think that there, if you look at the different acuities of the procedures, as you go into some of the lower acuity procedures, something like an inguinal hernia, pretty low acuity, patient should be up and out in 12 hours easy. And a lot of people have said, something like an intuitive complete overkill for that procedure. And I would tend to, in some respects, agree with that and think there might be an easier solution, something like a distal motion or maybe a Moon surgical or something. I think the problem's going to be you're still going to have the high acuity procedures. So you're still going to need a high acuity robot as well. And I think the challenge that's going to come in the next years is how many different types of robots will you allow in your hospital? Because each robot you have to be trained, and each robot needs the servicing, and each robot needs its particular things through the sterilization services. So there'll be a boundary limit on how many types of system you can get in there. That'll be number one. And then the second thing that could be a little bit of a boundary in there is the users willing to jump between them. I've seen this personally where some users just, if they really like the interface that they use on their robot, they struggle to go onto another robot. So that's it when I'm comparing robot to robot. If I'm looking at something more like a Moon surgical, which is an assisted laparoscopy in my mind, it's a slightly different thing. It's a way of basically allowing to do something like solo laparoscopy, and the benefits that you need in that are potentially, or the attributes of the robot you need are a lot lower for some of those procedures. But I still struggle in my head with all of these, because if you end up with straight instruments, even if now you've reduced the complexity of the robot and you end up with straight instruments, and it's the wristed instruments that allow the suturing to be easier, I think you can end up in this weird kind of conundrum where you fix one part of the problem, but you leave another part of the problem that you've got to deal with. So my mind is still open. I think there definitely is a need for lower acuity systems. The ultimate thing that I think healthcare systems really want is, it's not whether or not the system is less capable. What they want is less cost, less setup, less hassle of the things, so they can get much faster workflow. If you look at an ASC, or you look at a clinic in Europe, they need to get throughput really, really fast. So it's not so much about how capable the system is, but it's how complex it is to set it up. It's how quickly you can set up, tear down, get the throughput of the patients through. But there is a benefit you get with the big systems, because you get all the wristed suturing, and you get the stable 3D vision. You get certain attributes with it, but that then makes it more complex to set up, slower to set up, more expensive. And I think we've got to try and find that balance somewhere. I'm absolutely sure there is an absolute need for lower acuity systems with fast workflow. Has anyone nailed that yet? I don't think so, just quite yet, from what I've seen.
But what we are seeing is the emergence of those who are putting their foot on the playing field with like a distal and with a Moon, right? We're seeing now the market opening up there, because previously it was only an intuitive pie. And
Yes.
arguably from a form factor, let's say from a form factor, not procedure. So arguably you could say a Census, Transenterix, a Census now, CMR, Hugo, we're all at a form factor emulating Intuitive's Da Vinci. And meaning all incorporated, relatively similar footprint, so to speak, square footage. Every part of the system incorporated there, going back to your old days. I'm 61, so I remember my parents having the 8-track player, the turntable, the TV, all in that console, right? But if you really wanted to do something amazing, you had all separate components, because you could get a higher fidelity, experience and all that, right? But now with Distal and Moon, just as an example, because they're out there now, they are saying, wait a minute, I don't need to handle all the higher acuity stuff. And I'm going to open up that market And I think to your point, the ASCs are doing that. I want to jump into something too that you recently have have really presented well. It's damn expensive to put a robot in the market, and you break that out. You can make a prototype, you can get through V&V, you can build 10 robots, but if you're going to scale, I don't care how complex or uncomplex that robotic system is, you're talking billions.
Yes. Yeah. It's again, it's kind of, there's just a minimum bar you've got to have. So, you know, if you've put a complex electromechanical system, doesn't matter whether it's a super complex intuitive or a less complex moon, you end up with arms that need servicing. And a service engineer doesn't say, well, I'm not servicing intuitive, so I'll take a third of the pay. You know, they just don't do that. So there's a certain bar that if you just want to be in the game, there's a certain expense that it's going to take. If you want to sell a distal motion, or you want to sell an XI, you still need a salesperson to go and do it. You still got to pay them, and none of them turn around and say, well, you know, I'm not selling an XI, so therefore I'm very, very happy just to take a half a salary. So there's just a minimum amount that you'll need to have in there. And then the reach, if you want to be able to get everywhere, you know, just setting up a company in a country takes a huge amount of money. And if you want to do it yourself, and, you know, and this is something that you and I talked about as well, which is, are the small robot companies who are starting up, are they the right vehicle to actually commercialize the product? Because it just takes so much lead cash to go in and to prime the markets, to set up the training, to get a demo system or 5 demo systems for each country, to buy your trainers and put your trainers in place, to pay for all the training. All of that costs huge amounts before you start throwing off revenue. And I think that if you've not got billions, you know, a billion in the bank, it just is really, really hard.
You and I have talked about, we played about in our conversations, which I always enjoy, is look, the big players, respectfully, are not digital natives, right? The Medtronics, the J&Js, the Becton Dickinsons, the Strikers, and, you know, let's just keep it at that level right now. If I'm leaving somebody out, you know, BSC doesn't, you know, Mike was pretty clear he doesn't want to get in the robot business, but that might change. They're not good at developing surgical robots. Just evidence-based, right? Go down the calendar. They've spent billions and they still haven't commercialized a robot. And, you know, it's arguable what their robots are going to be able to do to compete. But certainly the digital natives out there of the companies that were birthed as surgical robotic companies and don't have internal politics, don't have to worry about redlining of programs when things get tight, don't have to answer to shareholders on a quarterly basis. You know, we watch what happened with Vicarious. You know, that the second you take a pre-commercial robot public, you're going to struggle because you just can't potentially answer the bell every quarter that way. But maybe the big strategics should be the distribution network for the organizations that develop robots, whether it's ophthalmology, soft tissue, ortho, whatever it is, and not try and develop the robot, but create a licensing partnering and have that distribution network in each of the regions, countries, wherever it is, and then figure out how do we cohabitate together. You keep your R&D team together because you're not going to get best-in-class roboticists going to the big strategics and staying. So I'm wondering if that's the model we should be moving towards sooner than later, or else, you know, Marco, pull up that slide if you can on the robotic surgery trend. Not that slide. Pull the other one up. Yeah, let's go to this one here. Steve, can you? I don't know. Can you see that?
It's a little bit distant for me, but if you explain it, I can probably make it out in the distance.
So this is the investment in robotic surgery. So you can see the bottom from 94 to 2010, actually to 2005, took $500 million totally invested in the category. So that's what's that? That's 12 years, right? 11 years. Then it took only 4 years for the next 500, the same 500 million to be put in. Yet since 2010, an additional $8 billion has been put into that market between Oris, CMR, Neosys, Momentus, Ascensus, Vicarious Think, Procept, Distal Motion, Noah. So obviously the money's going in there, and there's not many commercialization successes coming out of that because more of revenue and infrastructure than it is capabilities of the robot.
Yeah, I think you've nailed the right path. I think that what the small robot companies are good at is building robots, getting them fast, and doing the iterations that are needed really quickly to get them up to be a stable system and to just do all the basic learnings really quickly. The big companies are superb at channel. You know, they're just amazing at channel. And you know, you're not going to build. Very few companies can build the channel like that. Intuitive did it, but it took them 20 something years to do it. You can't do that today. I believe that your model that you think about, which is how do you let the small independent robot company do their magic on the R&D and the build it and decide how it's going to be sold, and then flip that over the fence to the big company that's got the infrastructure, they've got the training, they've got the education, they've got the servicing, they've got the sales channel and the marketing, and they've got the brand and the name and the finance to do all that. I think that's probably the only way it's going to be able to work properly. Otherwise, we're just going to see lots and lots of train wrecks of companies that got it all the way there, but then couldn't do the big lift, which is the commercialization. And I think likewise, you'll see train wreck divisions in the big companies where they just keep plowing money into the robot, bring out something suboptimal. And, you know, that division in there just couldn't quite make it over the gap to become a good commercial product. If you allow the two companies to exist in their own spheres, but somehow have a really good relationship between them where one makes it, one sells it, I think that is the smart model. And actually, that's where 1 and 1 would equal 3. And you'd also get, you know, huge time savings on one side and cost savings on the other, because you're putting it into an infrastructure that's already there, and you're leveraging already that infrastructure that's there. You know, it's a small company spending hundreds of thousands to set up offices around the globe is just not adding to their mission. It's just not adding to their, you know, to the value of the robot. Whereas if you could plug that straight into a J&J or a Medtronic or a Stryker or a Boston or somebody else, and you just leverage their infrastructure and their know-how of doing that, that's got to just make complete sense, right? I think the hard bit will be how the companies work it out, because the problem that you can end up with is if somebody takes one of these small companies and says, yeah, we'll leave you alone, but then doesn't, and then starts meddling with it, I think that's where the magic gets lost. I think that becomes a big problem.
Yeah, and you know, I use it as an analog on this. By the way, this is an Oppenheimer. I was at Biomed presenting at the Biomed conference in Israel, and Oppenheimer had some great data, and I'll go to a couple other slides there. So I wanted to give the attribution on that for those who are wondering where that is. But you know who did that really well? David Paul, although an orthopedic robot is a lot easier than a soft tissue, right? But David Paul from Globus did that. He's in outside Philly in Pennsylvania, and they're a pure implant company. He hired Norbert Johnson and said, Norbert, go up in Methuen, up in Massachusetts, and build me a robot that's a spine robot. And Norbert had the financing and certainly had an answer, but was not sitting in the culture and the politics and the ortho implant machine shop mentality, and allowed an expert to take a robotic based platform from OUS, bring it into the US, and then arguably, and be hard to argue against this, has best in class robot in the spinal space right now. And I do believe it was because David was bold enough to do that and kept the China wall up between the developmental team on a robot versus their core competency. And you could put that same model against a Medtronic and a J&J, et cetera. So yeah, I think that works. And the IPO market, that's the one I want there. So there's another slide from Oppenheimer up here that we were borrowed, that you talk about the IPO market. It's a terrible way for a surgical robotic company to go.
Yeah.
You just can't survive in that market. And the number of deaths on the side of the road there, unless once they go public, they're immediately acquired, like a Mako and Mazor and some of the others, you just get destroyed. And the one data point here, no, go back, Marco, to you, just that 99% of value created in public markets is intuitive.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know how much you have to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, you said something earlier, which I agree with, which is when people go IPO before they've even got a commercialized steady stream of revenue coming in. I've never understood that personally. I think that's not the right way to go at it. Some other people disagree with that and do. I think it's a terrible way. I think the part of the problem that you have as well, if you go IPO as a robot company, is it's just too lumpy. The business is too lumpy. You don't get into that quarterly stride where you say, we're going to sell 10 and we sell 10 and we sell 11. It doesn't work that way in the early days. Your install base is too low. You're still learning too much about the sales cycle. There's just so many variables that can happen. You just can't hit that stride. And with it being low numbers, you miss one or two deals, that's 30% of your sales for that quarter or whatever. Right. It's disastrous. It's disastrous. So yeah, I agree. I think the IPO side, until you're knocking out consistently, you've got 150 to 200 robots out there already. You know it inside out, and you can very well predict the way that it's going to go, and also have your consumable revenue stream helping as well. Yeah, I think you're right. It's you're asking to be part of the train wrecks that have happened by doing that.
Yeah. And then I want to go into a subject here. Performance versus business model. I still see too many surgical robotic companies over-index talking about the performance of their robot. That it can do backflips, that it can look up underneath things, it can twist around, it can do a cartwheel. I'm being a little facetious here, but how about the economic model, right? And I want to get your thoughts on this. I see this next generation of robots having dashboards for legitimately tied into this for the CFO, right? Yeah. Show me how many procedures I did. Show me my inventory. Show me my trends. For the surgeon, the gamification for the surgeon, for peer-to-peer sharing, for how long did it take me on my case, right? For the staff, where am I right now in the surgery? When can I turn that room? Where is he or she in the procedure? When can I start prepping the next room, right? And then for the OEM that supplies the robot is, what does my inventory look like? What is my adoption on that robot this week? Do I need to get a rep in there to drive higher adoption, or how do I come in there and partner with that ASC or hospital and figure out how can I get 3 more procedures this week for them out of that robot? If the companies that don't incorporate that dashboard mentality right now are going to run into a major issue and commit the same sins as those that say their robotic is more acrobatic than the competitors.
Yeah, I mean, data is going to be so important. It's going to be intrinsically linked to the systems, and it has to give more than just this is just how long my case took, or this is how many instruments. It's got to be that rich set of data that helps the customer make better business decisions, proves out your thesis. So if I say that, I've created a robot that's going to give you way more patient throughput, my dashboard better be able to show that. And you better be able to set lines on there for the CFO of the hospital and say, we by 3 months will hit this number, and they should be able to watch it go up day by day and hit it. I think that all of that is just going to be, and I keep saying it, it's just this is going to be table stakes. And any robot that comes and is not fully equipped to be able to throw off all of that data, make sense of it, and give insights, because just throwing huge lumps of data off is worse than throwing no data off. But throwing off really good data and the software generating the insights for the customer, for the company, for the surgeon, for the OEMs, that generates the insights and helps them to therefore manage their business, then that's going to be critical going forwards. It's got to be able to do that. And I do worry when I've seen some of the systems out there that they don't feel like they're going to be data rich enough to be able to do that. There's a couple of systems out there that I've looked at where, for example, they won't be able to give all the data during the operation. They'll be able to give it for the part that their robot does, but it won't be able to give all the data for the whole procedure. And I just wonder, is that only then going to be half useful, that data? Right. There was something that it was quite a while ago when I also think there's somewhere that needs to be able to take all the data from open, lap, and robotic at some point as well, because nobody's, not most places are not doing 100% robotic. So how do what do you do? Just throw away your 30% open case data and just don't use that? That doesn't count anymore. So again, I think where there's a chance here is with the robotics companies, is if they can lead this charge, and they should team up with some other companies. There's some great companies out there doing some good work on this. I think being able to look at the entire patient flow independent of the operation, then start stacking that up. If I was a CFO, that's what I'd be interested in. I'd be saying, okay, let me look at my comparative of open to lap to robotic. Let me look at the patient throughput. Let me look at this. And as a surgeon, what it may show you is, although you think you should do a robotic, I'll give a bad example, but a robotic lap chole. Okay, you should do a robotic chole. The data may just show, well, actually, we get more efficiency, great patient outcomes, we get more patient throughput when we do those parts of it lap, but we do these 5 other procedures robotic. And actually what we show from the data is that these procedures should be done open. And I think when you get that really rich data, and I think the robot can be the catalyst for this coming. I think when you get that rich data, I think healthcare systems will be able to make really smart decisions then, and the scheduling and everything will become very smart as well. But I do worry that some of the robots out there are not data rich enough, and I think that they will become casualties because they just don't have the data that people are going to need in the future.
Yeah, you bring up a fascinating subject. Yeah, I think it's 20, you probably know better than me, I think there's over 20 million soft tissue surgeries done annually, right? And 6% of them are done with a robot right now. That means 94% are done manually. And then the manual, you have all the variabilities with it, and you're not tracking the data. So it's a really interesting point you bring up is, if I can track my data manually, and somehow put at least some frame around it, not all the KPIs or all the data points I can track with a robot, because that's built in, but what can I start tracking in 94% of those, and at least start a data set that I can compare up against these emerging tech, new form factors. Everybody's going to win on that one.
Yeah, and I think this is going to take an industry change of thought, because you can't have one company owning a piece of this. I think what's going to have to happen is we're going to have some kind of collaboration across the industry where this data can be pooled for the benefit of the patients and the hospitals. And I think that's going to be a little bit of a struggle. But I kind of had a vision many years ago where, there was like an open standard where we all agreed on a data set that counts. And that was something that I kind of hoped that would start to emerge and come through, where, J&J, Medtronic, Intuitive, Stryker, everyone starts agreeing what a good data set looks like in conjunction with the hospitals and the healthcare systems and the insurers. And you end up with this sort of known data set that whichever operation is done with whichever product, somehow you capture some of that data, be it through visual systems, be it through scoring systems. I don't know how you would want to do it, but I think what would be amazing is if the industry could get together and work that out of what that data set looks like, And then everyone can then also compare, when you say before, my robot can do backflips and et cetera, et cetera. Great, fantastic. Show me what in the data set we've all agreed to, what's the impact in that? Where do you really stand up? Where do you really bring your value in that? Probably a pipe dream for me to do that. But that is something that I thought of a long time ago that I would just wish that the industry would do, so that we can do that comparison to see open lap robotic as an example. And we can look across it and do really good comparative measurements and understand what is the best thing for the patient, the healthcare system. And then you can look from that as well. And you can then say, and which systems are bringing the most value in each of those things, or which products are bringing the most value within each of those segments. And then we do more of that, right? And they would also give, I think, really good direction to companies of saying, it looks like if you do A, B, and C, or you make your product do X, Y, and Z, it becomes really, really valuable. People can say, okay, then we need to do more of X, Y, and Z in the product development. I think there's a lot of wins for everybody in it.
Yeah, and what's interesting, you just you just nailed it. Typically, robotic platforms come out of a university setting of a bunch of really smart individuals who can build a robot. Instead of starting at the bedside at the soft tissue they should be trying to impact and the economics they're trying to impact, and work backwards with their decisions from there. That's always been the fascinating part, but I don't think any robot started there. They all started as a science project, generally in a robotics lab at, Carnegie Mellon, or, insert Stanford, insert here.
Yeah.
Before we close out, what are you expecting to see, the way things are moving right now in the next 24 to 36 months? Because I can't even say what's going to happen beyond that in this marketplace.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting time. So I think you're going to see a couple of companies close. I think that some of them are just going to realize that their form factor or their finances don't allow them to continue. So I think there'll be several companies that close. I think there'll be dawning realizations by some of the bigger companies that it's way harder than they thought. And I think there'll be some modification that happens in the way that they go and approach this. So I'm interested to see then some new platforms coming out as well. I think there'll be an emergence a little bit of things like the EndoQuest. I think that people will start understanding some of these niche places where there can be really good application of robotics, where again, you don't go running head to head with intuitive. So some of the endoluminal stuff will be quite interesting. Some of the bronchial stuff that's happening out there. I think that companies like Moon will get some traction. I think that there is a definite pent up appetite for that kind of system in certain places around the world. So it'll be interesting to see how much traction they get there. That'll be interesting. I think what you're going to see is an explosion in vision. I think you're going to see a huge uptick in 4K, 4-chip 4K, ICG, and you might even see some of the things like like Active's kind of technology becoming broader used. And I know there's several hyperspectral imaging companies out there that are looking at applying that. So I think imaging is going to take a real boost in the next 2 years. And then I think there'll just be a little bit of a consolidation in the market in terms of sort of a reality at the hospital levels of how many different types of systems can you get into a hospital. And I think that'll be led by the academic institutions. I've already been involved with several academic institutions who've said, I want one of each system. And then when they actually come to the dawning reality of it, they start realizing, well, probably there's only room for maybe 2, maximum 3. So I think whoever the 3 front runners are in the next 24 months will also set a pattern, because the academic centers will have those 3. They'll be the 3 main ones in the academic centers. And I think that that'll start setting a trend, that there'll be a limit to how many types of platform you can have in any one institution. The caveat to that may be that institutions get a little bit smarter and have one type of mainframe up in the main block, But then what they might see is for their outpatient department or for the clinics or for their ASC, they might choose a completely different format, like a Moon or a Distal or something like that, which is, they're just going to say that is perfectly adequate for here, and therefore it's worth the investment in time, education, training, and having two systems to do that. So I think there's some of the trends that we'll see. I really think that those that have got rich data and apps, you're going to see the apps starting to be used more. I think that today there's what I would call the Strava pioneers who use the apps and get something out of it. I think as those apps become richer with better data, and more meaningful and give things back to the surgeons more, they'll be used. As they start to give back to the hospitals as well, so that they can start measuring things like inventory and things like this. And I know that Intuitive already has a really nice system on that. But as you see that expand more, it'll become a natural way that people will expect with the robot to have a really good data system. I think that registries, clinical data is going to be a really important thing in the next 2 years. And what I also predict is that as we get more of that clinical data, as we get more real world usage and we get expansion of robots, there will be certain procedures where people will draw the conclusion, it's nice on a robot, but actually it's better for us to do it laparoscopic. So I think we'll also see some procedures that are gaining traction at the minute actually go backwards a little bit, just because it's better for the, it's equal for the patient, but better for the healthcare system to do it in the traditional lab way. So I think there's going to be a whole mixed bag, and I think it'll be quite exciting to watch over the next 2 years.
Yeah, the dynamics are going to be fascinating, and you've got to you've got to be excited to be in the seat that you're in, because you got an inside look, an intimate look, and you certainly you learn through real world experience what's likely going to work and what's not going to work, or where the liabilities are. You and I had, maybe we'll do in our next session, is we've had some really deep discussions around end effectors, sizes, capabilities, liabilities, bioburdens, and maybe that should be a next conversation for us as well. But I really appreciate your time on this one today. I'd like to do this as a regular program for us if we can, and the market won't get too tough on us. But I think to your point, it's necessary, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. And again, the more that the industry has these open and frank discussions, again, none of this in my mind is ever meant to be pulling anybody down. In my mind, if we have these open discussions and we really pick at the scabs that matter, I think that we raise everybody's game. And I hope that people don't get defensive, or there's less people being defensive out there, and more people start saying it as it is, so that we can just have honest and frank conversations. Because ultimately, there's only really one goal in this, and the one goal that comes from this is that we get better technology, better companies to deliver better care to patients. And ultimately, I think if we can all sit around as professionals and just, without being upset or anything, just talk with each other really quite hard, and come sometimes to probably to disagreement, but sometimes to agreement, I think we help the patients.
Yeah. And hence the byline of the show. It's untitled, but it's provocative and necessary. Steve Bell, my friend, as always, I always leave smarter and more enlightened with our conversations around this subject.
Thank you very much, Joe, and looking forward to the next one.
You got it, my friend. Be well. I'm Joe Mullings from 160 Studios. Be well.